Good morning and most welcome to 1402, and I will now slowly start a project I've been thinking of for a while, and it's an introduction to the Gödelian contradictions, and I will do as usually, approach it from different angles. To be of an pedagogical assistance when it comes to the very hard grasp of the paradoxes that lies therein. I will start with an article, The Answer to the Question of Being by Graham Priest, of October 16, 2015. Introduction. At the beginning of Sein und Zeit, Heidegger famously asked the question of being. What is it to be? The question was to exercise him. In one way or another for the rest of his philosophical life. He came to the conclusion that because of a certain aporia, the question could not be answered. One cannot say what being is. Being shows itself. That is, beings show their being, and the job of the thinker is to open people's eyes to see this showing. Heidegger, notwithstanding, I think that the question of being can be answered. And the point of this essay is to do so. In the process, we will also investigate the ground of Heidegger's aporia and its implications. These matters will involve a certain construction concerning unity and its possibility. In the shape of the gluon theory. In the next section, we will look at Heidegger and his predicament more closely. I will then explain enough of the theory of gluons to make what follows intelligible. After that, we will be in a position to answer the question of being. In the final section, we will see how the theory of gluons explains Heidegger's aporia. Two, Heidegger. Start with Heidegger. Heidegger poses the question of being as follows. what is asked about in the question to be elaborated is being, that which determines beings as beings. That in terms of which beings have always been understood, no matter how they are discussed. The being of a being, then, is what it is which makes it to be. This is the very essence of Heidegger, very important. The being of a being, then, is what it is which makes it be. My comment here, you can see a process. Something is becoming. And I would say that is very close to the counterfactuals. And one thing that Heidegger is clear about from the very beginning is that being is not itself another being. This is almost as important. My comment here, I would say everyone thinks that. Inevitable thinking. The being of beings is not itself a being. The first philosophical step in understanding the problem of being consists in avoiding telling the mython tina diegiste, in not telling a story. That is not determining beings as being by tracing them back in their origins to another being. As if being had the character of a possible being. Reductionism in my comment is seeing being as made of other beings in an endless chain. He takes this to be so obvious that he does not give an argument for it in what follows. Indeed, it is actually hard to find arguments for the claim in the Heideggerian corpus. But one might essay a couple. One metaphysical and one grammatical. The metaphysical one is Neoplatonism, Neoplatonist. Being is the ground of beings. As such, it is not the kind of thing that can be a being. It can function as the ground only if it itself is beyond being and so not a being. The grammatical argument is somewhat different. We say, for example, Heidegger is. Heidegger refers to an object, a being. If is referred to a being, then the italicized phrase would simply be a list of two objects. Heidegger and being. But it is clearly not a simple list. In an obvious sense, it has a unity that the pair of objects lacks. One can hear both of these arguments in the following passage. If we painstakingly attend to the language in which we articulate what the principle of reason says as a principle of being, then it becomes clear we speak of being in an odd manner that is, in truth, inadmissible. We say being and ground, reason, are the same. Also very important. We say being and ground, and there's a slash, reason, are the same in citation marks. So the reason for the being is the same. Being is abyss. When we say something is and is such and so, then that something is in such an utterance represented as a being. Only a being is. The is itself. Being is not. My comment here is being does not conform to is. It's something different. Once more, it's very close to the ideas of quantum mechanics. Only what is not can be. The wall in front of you and behind me is. It immediately shows itself to us as something present. But where is its is? Where should we seek the presencing of the wall? Probably these questions already run Ori. End of quote. Whatever the reason, though, if being is not itself a being, we have a problem. if one is to answer the question of being, one must say something of the form, being is such and such. This uses being as a noun phrase. Denote noun phrase. And so treats its referent as an object, and is a thing, something static. It follows that one cannot answer the question of being. I take this insight to be what drives much of Heidegger's later thought, what is usually referred to die Kehre. Being cannot be said. It can only be shown. If one has the eyes to see it, beings show their beings. One's eyes can be opened by art, poetry, language. Before it becomes a dead metaphor. As he says in the origins of the work of art, the artwork opens up in its own way the beings of beings. This opening up, i.e. this revealing, i.e. the truth of beings, happens in the work. In the artwork, the truth of beings has set itself to work. is truth setting itself to work. So, being can be found in art. My commentary reminds me of Ian McGilchrist. The contrast between the left hemisphere that would probably say that being is consistent of beings. Whereas the right hemisphere takes a direct approach. A solution to the question of being can, therefore, only consist in helping to open people's eyes in this way. But discerning eyes will also perceive an aporia here. Never mind answering the question of being. If one cannot refer to being with a noun phrase, one cannot even ask it. What is being? Indeed, for exactly this reason, one can say nothing at all of being. To bend a comment from Russell's introduction to Wittgenstein's Tractatus, which finds itself with a similar aporia. Everything involved in talking of being cannot grammatically be said. what may give some hesitation about this fact is that despite his arguments to the contrary, Mr. Heidegger manages to say a good deal about what cannot be said. Heidegger was, of course, well aware of the problem. And he wrestled with various ways to avoid it. Thus, for example, he tried the technique of writing under erasure. Quote, a thoughtful glance ahead into the realm of being can only write it as being crossed out. The crossed lines at first only repel. Especially the almost ineradicable habit of conceiving being as something standing by itself. Nothingness would have to be written. And that means, though, thought of just like being crossed out. My comment here, the crossing out is the indication of the opposition in non-existence. A true counterfactual. And thereby one does not need to explain beings in other beings. Like reductionism, empiricism, all sorts of atomisms. but also the different strands of abstract philosophy. In Saussure we find intention. In Russell we have the meaning of the words being its being. And also another parallel. The left hemisphere in the depiction of Ian McGilchrist always see things as made up of other things in an endless reductionist thinking. All can be taken apart, and in the parts the reductionist is looking for the whole, the meaning. I think we take a little pause and have a summary. So my summary so far, we were talking about beings as explained as beings, and existence in the Newtonian paradigm always being as beings, atoms, classical laws, initial conditions, and it goes on lower endlessly. And as I mentioned earlier, it takes different strands, but they all, whether they are empiricists, idealists, logico-positivists, existence, being, is always deferred, not present. It is pointed to be somewhere else. It does not show itself by itself. It's not present. There is no presencing. And as Graham Priest mentioned, there is a grammatical error. If you say beings, being is beings, it is not an and, it is something different. So already there's a problem. There was also an example from art. Art presents itself directly. It is presencing. It is not something other. There is no deferral or referral. It is there in your presencing. This is close to quantum mechanics. Being there is crossed out. And it's not consistent because non-consistency is its very nature. One can also say the counterfactuals is a crossing out of being. It gives another possibility, an opening in something that in an almost inevitable way leads to the problem of seeing being as beings. It's a relief. Gödel shows that theorems does not stem from axioms. So the question, what is the beings of theorems, was answered with a crossing out. They stand for themselves, and only then can they come to their full presencing. That is truly fulfilled being, a living, processing being. Maybe there's some question. So do you want to use this?
Yes, I could use it. Can put it on. Hello, hello. So Graham Priest says that there are two beings in Heidegger, the metaphysical one and the grammatical one. I see a problem with the conception of a metaphysical being in Heidegger, since Heidegger was against metaphysics. He wanted to get away from the metaphysical one. And for Priest, it seems that metaphysical is something positive. It might be, I don't know, it's too early to say, but I think there is a tendency. So how should we understand? So in everyday language it's easy to forget that this being is actually a present participle, we take it as a noun, and that creates already a problem. And we have spoken about counterfactuals, and counterfactuals is a process, as we have said, it's an action. And it's very, I agree completely with this. So beings, we are, how do we define beings or human beings? I would say it's the action, the doings. So for instance, let's take this as an example. So being, we could say it's a presence. And then when you cross out, you have an absence. But it's easy to reduce the human being, our being, to a dichotomy, presence and absence. It's helpful. You have a, if you can get also the tendency to absence, you have gone a big step towards understanding. So you have to have absence also, because we focus too much on presence, then you forget the necessity of absence. But I think to get to an even higher understanding, you have to understand it's a process, a counterfactual. So that is, when we see this crossed out, okay, so we think there is only, we see it as a result. Instead, we should see being as the action of crossing out. So it's something that you do. So the being, I would say, is somebody who does presencing and absencing. I would emphasize does presencing, so it's an action. So it's the action of doing presencing, absencing. And I think that in another context in this paper, Priest quotes Heidegger. The wall is, I think this is a little bit misleading from Heidegger's part. It's easy to think that the wall here is something lifeless. While we know, for instance, you can watch a documentary by Brian Greene. He says that walls have qualities, they are bent and so forth. So I think to say that wall is already a problem. Even a wall is a living being, not in the sense of human being, but it's nothing static. That is the important, it's nothing static. It's easy to fall into the trap. Wall does things, even if we cannot see it. So I give this back to you if you want to comment on my comment.
Yes, very good, yeah. It's definitely a process. And it was a process when it was made first time by Heidegger, unconsciously even. It can be demonstrated by doing it slowly, then you can see it is happening. An action, as Heidegger is often referring as presencing. It's coming to being. And Ian McGilchrist says that people who are suffering from schizophrenia, they cannot see movement, cannot understand this flow in reality. Everything is divided into small movement with no movement, only moments. We know that schizophrenic patients are suffering from extreme left hemisphere dominance. That's an example to make the understanding more expanded. The example from art was telling for me. When I see art, I see the whole of it. I do not reduce it or say what it is. It's directly presencing for me. You know, in a very lively manner. I'll continue with the text. Failure of this strategy is manifest though. Heidegger has to talk about being in order to explain what it is that the erasure shows is not to be taken as standing by itself. The erasure, so to speak, is together with what it erases. I think here of the Necker cube in two different aspects is its being. And if you fixate on one, if you take the narrower perspective, you actually miss out on both. As far as I know, Heidegger never solved this problem. Maybe having no cure, he learned to live with the disease. Or maybe once he figured out that the action was in opening people's eyes in a certain way, it is because irrelevant to explain what it is that is seen. As Zhang Zi says, a Chinese philosopher, a fish trap is for catching fish. Once you've caught the fish, you can forget about the trap. A rabbit snare is for catching rabbits. Once you caught the rabbit, you can forget about the snare. Words are for catching ideas. Once you've caught the idea, you can forget about the words. Three, unity and the glue-on theory. So much for the Heideggerian background. Before we turn to the answer to the question of being, I need to explain the background theory that informs it. This concerns unity and what makes it possible. I shall not attempt to justify the theory here or to show its technical coherence. I do that elsewhere. I wish merely to explain the essence of the view in question. Take an object with parts. What makes them into a single thing? There must be something in virtue of which they form a unity. quite possibly this thing depends on the unity in question. If the unity is a house, its parts are bricks, and maybe what makes them into a unity is their geometric configuration. If the unity is a symphony, its parts are notes. And maybe what makes them into a unity is their arrangement. But whatever the binding agent is, there must be one. Let us call it neutrally the gluon of the unity. It does not take a lot of thought to see that gluons are very strange things. They appear to have contradictory properties. A gluon is an object. We can think about it, quantify over it, refer to it. But it is not an object. If it were, the totality comprising it and the other parts would be just as much a congeries as the parts themselves. We would want for an explanation of how the unity is achieved. Think of Bradley's regress at this point. If the gluon were just another object, there would need to be a hypergluon. Holding the gluon and the other parts together, and so on. We're off on a vicious regress. My comment here, it's this vicious regress that is inevitable once you establish the question, what is being, in the pre-Heideggerian way, or the pre-quantum mechanical way. So the gluon is an object and not an object. But how is it that it holds all the parts, including itself, together? If it were distinct from other parts, Bradley's regress would strike. It must therefore be identical with each of the other parts. How to make sense of this idea? We may define identity in the standard fashion, deploying Leibniz's identity of indiscernibles. X equals Y is all Z's, ZX equals ZY. Where the quantifier is second order and the connective is the material biconditional. My comment, biconditional means it equals in both directions. Note, however, that we are dealing with objects, some of which have contradictory properties. Hence, this must be the material biconditional of some para-consistent logic. My comment here, para-consistency, we covered. Around 1,000, I would think, in the lecture series. So suppose that we have a unity. Let's its gluon be G and let A, B, C and D be its other parts. The logic, I think you have to look in the paper yourself. It's a bit complicated. So I go to paragraph 4 on the same page. We'll have to remember that Graham Priest is a logician. Four, the answer to the question. We are now in a position to answer the question of being. But first we need to be clear about the sense of being involved. To be a being for Heidegger is simply to be an object, that is, to be anything that one can think of, predicate something of, refer to. As Heidegger says, everything we talk about, mean, and are related to is in being in one way or another. and how we ourselves are is also a being. Being is found in thatness and whatness. Reality, the objective presence of things. Vorhandenheit, subsistence, validity, existence, Dasein. And in the there is escaped. My comment here and guess is Vorhandenheit could easier lead to the problem of telling what is being, but not necessarily so. It's a Stimmung, but very unusual. And being is used in all knowledge and all predicating. In every relation to beings and in every relation to oneself. And the expression is understandable without further ado. Everyone understands. The sky is blue. I am happy. And similar statements. That is, to be a being/object is in Meinungian terms to have So-Sein, to be of that aspect, I would say. Given this understanding of being, it is clear that being and unity come to the same thing. If something is an object, it is one thing. And if it is one thing, it is certainly an object. The thought is, in fact, as old as Aristotle. As he puts it, being and unity are the same and are one thing in the sense that they are implied by one another as principle and cause are. For one man and a man are the same thing, and man who is and man are the same thing. And the doubling of the words in one man and one man who is does not give any new meaning. And similarly with one. So that it is obvious that the addition in these cases means the same thing. And unity is nothing other than being. End of Aristotle's quote. My comment here is, do also think of cause and effect as being of the same ontic quality, and how we like most usually to explain cause in effect or effect in cause. The best example is, of course, from Smolin and Deutsch, showing that initial conditions and classical laws is a sort of ontic is question. It leads to infinite regress. And again, Aristotle, and that in a sense unity means the same as being is clear from the fact that it follows the categories in as many ways and is not comprised with any category. E.g., neither in substance nor in quality. But is related to them just as being is. And from the fact that in one man, nothing more is predicated than in man. Just as being is nothing apart from substance or quality or quantity, or to be one is just to be a particular thing. My comment here of Aristotle's text is to think of the supplément by Jacques Derrida, an additive to make something even more what it is. A tendency Jacques Derrida noticed in Western metaphysics. The question that gets answered in other beings is a sort of supplément, a referral, an unnecessary additive for something that is already complete in every aspect. The thought is expressed in more pellucid terms by Plotinus at the beginning of Ennead 6. It is in virtue of unity that beings are beings. This is equally true of things whose existence is primal, and of all those that are in any degree to be numbered among beings. What could exist at all except as one thing? The pride of unity, a thing ceases to be what it is called. No army unless a unity, a chorus, a flock must be one thing. Even house and ship demand unity. One house, one ship, unity gone, never remains. Thus even continuous magnitudes could not exist without inherent unity. Break them apart, and their very being is altered in the measure of the breach of unity. You put a little pause there, maybe. Take a plant and animal. The material form stands a unity. Fallen from that into a litter of fragments, the things have lost their being. What was no longer there is replaced by quite other things. As many others, precisely as possess unity. I think that was an absolutely great quote. It takes the zest of this referral or reductionism, and it shows by asking the what is in the ontic fashion, you lose the unity. A man is no longer a man. And this is very similar to the voice of the friend from Derrida. Once we try to etiquette it or ask, what is it? An instant referral is happening and it becomes static, still and fragmented. So to the summary, this what is question, the ontic mood, introduces a referral to the oneness. It gets explained in something other. The being becomes beings. And in the sense of the French philosopher Jacques Derrida, the referred thing, the supplément, penetrates the unity and becomes parasitic. So it both differs in time, it's not there. What is answered by the what is question. It's differs. This is captured in difference and also in difference, that is in itself an interesting counterfactual, a variety of the crossing out. I especially like the quote of Plotinus. This reducing one thing into something other rids existence of its full presence. It becomes stillborn, non-alive. Not present, differ. We lose the unity. And to paraphrase Aristotle, one man is a man. To say that he is a man does not add. He is in his essence a man. In unity, in oneness, unos mundos, I think it's an expression, the whole. To be them, to quote Priest, is exactly to be one. And we have previously mentioned the voice of the friend. When we give the voice direction, when we put an etiquette, answering unconsciously, habitually, without thinking, we make the voice less. It loses literally its nature. It becomes something deferred and different from the voice of the friend. Counterfactuals are bringing existence to the world once more. It stops the stillness happening, because even stillness, or the static tendency that Heidegger points out, is a sort of becoming. It hides itself that it is a becoming, but it is a stillborn becoming. It doesn't have the vividness, and then it forgets that it has also become, that it is also a presencing. Maybe coming from Kalle here?
Thank you. Let me use your paper and reread one phrase from Plotinus. Even house and ship demand unity, etc., and break them apart, and the very being is altered in the measure of the breach of unity. So let me illustrate it. Like here, you have a say house, very simple house, 4 walls. So he says that once you are created the house, it is a unity, and if you break it, it alters. But I think that gives Plotinus is creating an impression of being static, not static. That is, Plotinus was a Neoplatonist, So you still have this idea. If I can criticize Plotinus, this is a great simile or metaphor that he uses. But he said, okay, so only once you alter it, say you add a room, then you alter the house. But I think that even when you have a ready house with a walls, it alters all the time. Say you perhaps you have a chair there and then you place it here, or you even so even the walls are never static, as we have seen from Brian Greene and from even from Einstein. The walls are moving, so it's never static. So you don't have to break it or add anything there to have alteration. So everything is both. Even if Plato was inspired by Heraclitus, he was inclined to static unity. So you have to own the being there. But we should return to Heraclitus. Everything is so even a house is never static. It's always in the movement, even though it's not clear to us. It's easy to fall into that everything is static, passive event-shares. Do you want to add something to this? My criticism of Plotinus.
I think you're right. I think Plotinus is a Neoplatonist. In this quote, he seems to be pointing to the flux of Heraclitus, as you mentioned. And it's important to know and understand that the movement is on a very, very microscopic level. The quantum field is movement from where everything is becoming. The house is also the neck cube. It has different takes. And by excluding one, by asking the what is question to the house, we rob something of it, of its energy, of its vividness. And doing that, Graham Priest mentions in the beginning of the article, this is an habit. We are in the habit of doing so. And we need to put energy to discover it. It's the same with the counterfactuals. You don't understand them, you train them. And you become better at it. It's a new Stimmung. You slowly change your understanding capacity. Not only what's inside the understanding, the content, you are also changing the form. And then you have the greater, more encompassing understanding. I say thank you very much for your patience. Thank you, Kalle, for your comments, and have a very pleasant morning.
Thank you.